You flick a switch and the dark disappears. No hesitation, no ritual, no fear. It happens so automatically that you don't even register it as a kind of power. But for nearly the entire span of human existence, that small motion was simply impossible, and the absence of light wasn't a minor inconvenience tucked into the edges of your day. It was the most dangerous part of every single day. The real answer to what ancient humans actually feared at night is far stranger, and far more useful to you right now than any ghost story ever managed to be. Picture a small fire burning low at the edge of a camp. Picture the way shadows seem to stretch and multiply the instant the flames start to dip. Your ancestors watched this happen every evening, for hundreds of thousands of years, with nothing standing between them and the darkness except a flame that a gust of wind could put out in seconds. So what did they actually fear specifically? Not folklore yet. Not demons with names and personalities. They feared something simpler and far more immediate, the exact moment their senses stopped working. Human eyes are built for daylight. Color vision, depth perception, the split-second recognition of a face or a shape at a distance, nearly all of it depends on light striking your retina in very particular ways. Take the light away and your most trusted sense collapses almost instantly. Meanwhile, many of the animals hunting your ancestors had no such weakness. Lions, leopards, hyenas. Their eyes often contain a reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum, a kind of built-in mirror behind the retina that bounces light back through the eye a second time, leaving them several times more sensitive in low light than you will ever be. This wasn't a fair fight. The night wasn't just frightening to your ancestors. It was, quite literally, mathematically dangerous. This isn't theoretical. Paleoanthropologist C.K. Brain spent years examining fossils recovered from Swartkrans Cave in South Africa, studying puncture marks on the skulls of early hominins. What he found lined up almost perfectly with the spacing of leopard canine teeth. Separately, researcher Lee Berger examined the skull of the famous Tong child fossil and identified puncture and gouge marks consistent with the talons of a large bird of prey, likely an eagle. Your ancestors weren't simply worried about predators in some abstract sense. The fossil record shows in startling physical detail that they were sometimes the meal. Other primates solved this nighttime problem by climbing. Baboons cluster together on sheer cliff faces at night, places no leopard can easily follow. Chimpanzees build sleeping platforms high in the forest canopy, often switching locations from night to night so predators can't learn a pattern. Your ancestors, walking upright across increasingly open ground, gradually lost easy access to that option. They needed a different kind of defense, and that defense became each other, fire, and a nervous system that almost never fully relaxed. Why would that matter for understanding nighttime fear specifically? Because most of those predators hunted during the exact hours your ancestors were least equipped to defend themselves. Darkness didn't invent new dangers so much as it stripped away your one consistent advantage: sight. Historian A. Roger Eckert spent years digging through court records, diaries, and medical texts from the centuries before electric light, trying to reconstruct how people actually experienced nighttime before it could be switched on and off at will. What he found reshapes how you should think about your own sleep right now. Most households, he discovered, didn't sleep in one unbroken block the way you probably do. They slept in two distinct phases: a first sleep, then a waking period in the middle of the night, then a second sleep before dawn. During that middle waking stretch, people prayed, talked quietly, tended the fire, or simply lay still listening. Was that insomnia? Eckert argues it wasn't a flaw at all. It looks far more like a feature. A built-in watch shift that kept at least one mind semi-alert through the most vulnerable hours of the night. Why would a body evolve a built-in watch shift? Because for most of human history, sleep wasn't simply rest. It was a risk you had to manage carefully every single night with your eyes closed and your guard only partially up. Evolutionary anthropologist David Sampson has spent years living alongside hunter-gatherer communities like the Hadza of Tanzania, studying how people sleep in environments that closely resemble the ones your distant ancestors actually faced. What he documented is striking. People in these communities wake far more often during the night than people in industrialized cities do, and they spend noticeably less time in the deepest stages of sleep. Sampson's social sleep protection hypothesis proposes that this isn't poor quality sleep at all. It's calibrated sleep, shaped by evolution to keep at least part of the group semi-alert at every hour of the night. Sleeping too deeply for too long in an unguarded camp could be a fatal mistake. So the body adjusted generation after generation, and it never fully unadjusted. That's why you sometimes wake at 3 in the morning for no obvious reason, and your brain immediately starts cataloging every sound in the house. Is that the wind? A floorboard settling? Nothing at all. You're not malfunctioning in that moment. You're running software that's hundreds of thousands of years old, built for a world that genuinely needed it. Here's where the fear gets stranger and more abstract. It was never only about identifiable predators. It was about a slower, more general dread, simply not knowing what's actually out there. Your brain, at its core, is a prediction machine. It takes incomplete sensory information and fills the gaps almost instantly, usually with whatever interpretation is most likely to keep you alive a little longer. In daylight, your visual system can confirm or rule out a threat in a fraction of a second. In darkness, it loses that ability almost entirely, so it does something curious instead. It starts generating threats just in case. Evolutionary psychiatrist Randolph Ness has a useful name for this pattern: the smoke detector principle. A smoke detector that only goes off when there's definitely a fire is paradoxically a bad smoke detector, because by the time it's certain, the building may already be lost. A good smoke detector goes off too often, triggered by burnt toast, by steam, by nothing identifiable at all, because a false alarm costs you almost nothing while a missed fire costs you everything. Your fear response was shaped by that exact same cost-benefit logic. It's built to overreact, not because your ancestors were anxious by temperament, but because the ones who underreacted to a rustling bush in the dark didn't survive long enough to pass that calmness on to anyone. That's the real twist hiding behind tonight's question. The shiver you might still feel walking down an unlit hallway isn't a glitch in your nervous system. It's a feature that worked exactly as intended for hundreds of thousands of years, in a world where a single missed warning could end everything. Every ancestor who felt absolutely nothing in the dark, who never flinched at an unexpected sound nearby, simply isn't your ancestor. They didn't live long enough to have descendants. You exist in part because somewhere far back in your lineage, somebody got scared at exactly the right moment and ran. So what did early humans actually do about all of this beyond simply being afraid? Fire usually gets credited as humanity's great technological leap forward, and it deserves that reputation, but its first job wasn't cooking dinner. Its first job was pushing back the radius of the unknown. A fire created a small, defensible bubble of visibility inside an otherwise predator-dense darkness. It also meant the group could rotate who stayed alert, instead of everyone staying half awake out of pure necessity. Some of the earliest solid evidence for this comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, where burned bone and ash deposits dated to roughly 1 million years ago show hominins were already using fire deep inside an enclosed, easily defended space that predators couldn't approach without warning. Some researchers argue that controlled fire use may have actually reshaped human sleep architecture itself, allowing for longer, deeper rest once part of the group could reliably watch the perimeter. Darkness didn't just inspire fear in your ancestors. It quietly engineered technology, social structure, and sleep rhythms that are still sitting somewhere inside your biology today. And the fear didn't stay purely practical for very long. The moment human language became complex enough to tell stories, the unknown of the night finally got names. Spirits, demons, predatory gods that hunted only after dark. Across cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years with no contact between them whatsoever, people independently invented some version of a being that only comes out once the sun goes down. That kind of consistency isn't a coincidence. That's a real, embodied fear, searching for a shape to attach itself to. The monster under your childhood bed wasn't an invention of a young imagination. It was an ancient survival instinct, simply wearing whatever costume your particular culture happened to hand it. Developmental psychologists have long noted that this fear doesn't even need to be taught. It tends to emerge in early childhood across nearly every culture studied, often before a child has ever heard a single scary story, which suggests the wiring arrives well before the folklore does. So why does any of this still matter to you, lying in bed right now, phone glowing in the dark, doors locked, alarm set, nowhere near anything that could actually hunt you? Because the architecture never updated. You don't live anywhere near a leopard. Your home has deadbolts, motion sensor lights, and a device in your pocket that can summon help within seconds. None of that matters to the part of your brain built on the savannah. That circuitry doesn't run on modern safety statistics. It runs on darkness and unfamiliarity, full stop. That's why an unfamiliar hotel room can feel unsettling at 2 in the morning even though it's objectively safer than your own home. That's why a sudden power outage can turn an ordinary house into a place that apparently requires you to check the closet, just to be sure. It even explains some of your stranger daytime habits. Notice how a true crime documentary, watched safely on your own couch, can still make you double-check the front door before bed, or how a stretch of unread crime headlines scrolled through late at night can leave you glancing at shadows you would have ignored that same morning. Your prediction machine doesn't distinguish well between a recreated threat and a real one. It registers darkness, uncertainty, and danger-shaped information, and responds the only way it knows how, the same way it has for longer than language has existed. There's something almost reassuring in all of this if you let it sit for a second. The unease you feel at 2 in the morning, the instinct to glance over your shoulder on a dark, empty street isn't weakness, and it isn't irrational. It's evidence. It's proof that you're carrying forward a system refined across hundreds of thousands of years by people who absolutely needed it to work, because the ones whose systems failed simply aren't part of your story anymore. Every time that system fires, it's a small, strange tribute to every ancestor who listened to it and lived. Tonight you'll flip that same switch, and the dark will disappear in an instant, exactly like it always does. But this time, you'll know what your ancestors understood long before they ever had a word for it. The dark was never really about monsters. It was about a few 100,000 years of hard-earned proof that the exact moment your senses go quiet is the moment you can least afford to stop paying attention.